I used to live in a townhouse duplex by myself with my dog and 2 cats near a train station. There were often commuters who park outside my place and pass by through the day and night. Occasionally, I had cigarettes or stuff stolen from my front veranda. I even had my next door neighbor's ex-boyfriend come to my door telling me he had a hitman after him and he had a gun. But none of this scared me like the night I was watched. My dog lives indoors and I will take him out for a last wee before bed. My backyard light was broken and was up too high to change the bulb, so I always took him out the front. That night, it was around 11 p.m. and I took him out front. It was a hot summer night and I was mindlessly standing on the footpath when I saw movement across the road from me. Out of nowhere, a man had appeared and was walking diagonally across the street away from me. I thought it was odd because I hadn't seen him come from the other direction. I continued to think about it. Where he came from was from outside of a house that was being renovated. I knew the owners weren't living there and thought maybe he was going to try to steal stuff. So I kept looking down the road to where he had gone. He had turned the corner down the next street. I kept watching and then I suddenly see his head pop around the corner to see if I'm still outside. This gave me the absolute creep, so I grab my dog and go inside. I turned off all of my lights and go upstairs to my bedroom, which is at the front of the townhouse and faces the street. I thought I would keep watch at my neighbor's house and call the police if he came back. I peer through my blinds, which cover sliding doors coming off a small balcony. And like clockwork, I see a dark figure walk down from the corner and down my street. He's moving towards the house across the road, and then I suddenly lose sight of him. A tree in front of my townhouse obscures my view for a moment, and then there he is. He's not just there, he has stopped at the top of my driveway, standing there like Jason Voorhees. I kid you not, his arms were out by his sides and his legs apart in an unnatural stance, like he was preparing for something. Like he wanted to come kill me. My heart is racing so hard I can barely hear, and I'm standing there slack-jawed looking at this would-be assailant when one of my cats comes to see what's happening. My cat slides his body between the blinds and window, further opening it, and I see this person, this man looking up towards me. I'm thinking surely that he sees me. If he does, this doesn't stop him. He starts walking down my driveway, undeterred and fixated. I lose sight of him under the balcony and awning. By this time, my eyes are watering in fear and tears are streaming down my face. I don't know what to do. I go sit on my bed, and I pick up my mobile and dial my dad, who lives a suburb away. I whisper to him what's happening, and he said he will be there as soon as he can. I lie down in my bed and lie as still as I can, with tears rolling down my cheeks. Pure fear, not knowing what this man was doing downstairs and if he could get in. What if I hadn't locked the doors? Then it dawned on me. Why am I lying here in the dark crying? Turn a light on. So I did. What seemed like a lifetime, but was probably just a couple of minutes later, my dad arrived. He had an umbrella with him. I live in Australia, so no guns, but he could have at least brought a knife. I stayed on the phone with Dad while he searched outside for the man. The man was gone. Maybe me turning on the lights scared him off. I called the police, who said I should have called sooner. Of course I should have. I don't know why I didn't. They came out with a dog and didn't find him either. I don't know what he wanted, but for a good year after that, I was so scared of living there. I'm still a scaredy cat, but reading other stories and hearing them makes me realize I'm not alone. We can all learn from these experiences, so I and we know what to do if something scary happens. Right outside my apartment, smoking a cigarette, an unknown person snuck around a corner and sprayed me with pepper spray while I was looking at my phone. I could make out a tall, thin man with a backpack walking away with his hands in his pockets before I lost the ability to keep my eyes open. There were no other people on the sidewalk in either direction. I didn't see his face, and he didn't say anything, or even try to take anything from me or grab me. He didn't even stick around to watch me be all messed up, just walked away, like nothing happened. I'm very thankful that I was able to feel for my keys and get back into my building, but then I started to realize that I could have permanent damage if I didn't get to a sink. I couldn't find the key to my studio. I was starting to not be able to breathe. I pounded on every door I could feel until my neighbor, whom I had never met before this moment, opened up for me. She let me burst into her bathroom and toss water everywhere. I felt so horrible for ruining her bathroom like that and bringing that smell to her place, but I will be eternally grateful to this lady for helping me and calling the police. I never found him, and now I'm wondering if this was random, or if this dude was waiting for me. This story begins sometime around my junior year of high school. I was 15 years old, and in that phase of my life where I didn't listen to anyone, yet at the same time was completely impressionable. At the beginning of the year, I was sitting in my 6th period chem class, probably zoned out, looking at my phone under the clunky gray lab table, when I heard 2 people laughing to my right. The way the classroom was set up was a long rectangle, so essentially the teacher wouldn't really be able to hear what was going on in the back. The people laughing were a guy and a girl, Eric and Callie. They were somewhat popular, not the top of the food chain by any means, but everyone knew them. My younger sister knew Eric because they had a tennis match a month or 2 earlier. Eric was really funny. This is a crucial element to the story. He was definitely the class clown. He was tall, good-looking, and extremely charismatic. I wasn't attracted to him, but I could see why everyone else was. I think it was at this point in time where I made one of the most regrettable decisions of my life. I decided I wanted to be friends with Eric. He was in my 2nd, 5th, and 6th periods. The next morning, I poked him in the back in Spanish class. "Hey," I said, "I heard my sister kicked your ass in tennis." He turned around with a goofy smile, his friends all looking at me. "Who's your sister?" His voice had a specific cadence to it. "Karen," I replied. I don't remember the rest of this encounter, but I'm pretty sure he denied losing the tennis match. I think the conversation ended shortly thereafter, and my day continued until I saw him in math class. Algebra 2 was one of those classes where the teacher would lecture for a while, give us homework, and then let us have the rest of the period to work on it, so we wouldn't have to do it when we got home. I was looking at my paper, probably confused, when I hear a familiar voice. "Hey girl." I looked down to see Eric, crouched next to my desk on the floor. "What's up?" He started asking me about tennis, and once I said that I played, a huge smile spread across his face. I think this is when he latched on to me. He asked me for my phone number, and I gave it to him. That day, in our next period, he introduced me to Callie. She was older and really intimidating. I had never met anyone like her, and I was beginning to get excited at the prospect of these new interesting friends. That night, he kept texting me non-stop. He would ask me questions, and then would reply with "ha ha ha" to everything I said. I thought it was weird, but that was just his humor. After this day, he didn't leave my side. We spent most of the school day together, and then would be in constant contact after school. This was 2011, so we were mostly on Facebook or doing group phone calls with Callie and 2 other friends of mine I had brought into the group, Sasha and Natalie. There were lots of red flags. Eric wanted me to hold hands with him at school and told everyone he had taken my virginity. For some reason, this wasn't something I got too mad about. I just thought it was weird. He would say, "Your virginity belongs to me." Again, I assumed it was a joke. I always assumed Eric wasn't attracted to girls because he said he wasn't, although he would have sex with them and then tell everyone, making fun of them. We would walk down the hallway after 5th period, and he would stop for a group of freshman girls waiting for him, to give them each a kiss on the lips. One time we were walking to the bus, and there was a girl about 10 feet in front of us. She was cheating on her boyfriend, which I whispered to him, pointing her out. Yes, it was childish, but keep in mind this was high school and I was 15. He proceeds to run towards her and stops her, only to point at me and tell her what I said. She came over and yelled at me, and he watched, laughing. A few months into the friendship, I began sneaking out with Eric, bringing him alcohol from my dad's liquor cabinet. Eric was a heavy drinker, especially considering our age. This came to a head when he asked Callie and I to come over one night. His dad was in prison, and his mom was in rehab, so he lived with his grandparents. We pulled up outside of his house and his car wasn't there. So we waited for a while, and finally, he sped into the neighborhood and stumbled out of the driver's side, wasted. We followed him inside, and his grandparents weren't home. I don't know what I said, but the next thing I know, he grabs a knife off the kitchen counter and charges at me. I took off running and made it to Callie's car, slamming the door shut and locking it. He stared at me through the window before bursting out in laughter. My heart was racing and my blood ran cold. Callie got into the car and we left. I don't know why I stuck around. It was like an abusive relationship. He told me he was the only guy who would ever find me attractive, but somehow it would turn into a joke, and I would let it go. I believe the breaking point was when I heard about the baby squirrel. He had found a live baby squirrel after school and brought it home. His grandparents said they didn't want it in the house, so he walked outside and tossed it into the retention pond. I wasn't there for that, but it disgusted me. In algebra, a few days later, he knocked my pen off my desk and called me a bitch. "Eric, I don't want to be friends with you anymore," I told him firmly. "Don't talk to me." His head snapped back, and he moved to the desk in front of mine. "You won't be able to ignore me," he laughed. "I know where to find you." "I'm going to college next year," I reminded him. "You'll never be able to get away from me." "Are you threatening me?" "Yes." I know that sounds like a cheesy horror movie, but that was our exchange, word for word. The next week was endless phone calls and him trying to get me to talk to him at school. At first it was jovial, when he thought I was going to change my mind. Then he came up to me in math class and opened his backpack. Inside were several large kitchen knives. "In case there's a zombie attack," he said, with another big smile. I should have told the teacher at that point. I know I really should have, but it wasn't until a few days later when he pushed me too far. "I'm going to assault you, then murder you, and I'll make Natalie film it," he said. I went to the dean's office and told him everything. I had grown up being told not to snitch, but I couldn't focus in class anymore. I had been a good kid. I had never been in trouble, so they believed what I told them. But here's the kicker. They called him to the office and he admitted to everything, nodded, smiling, and confirming all the stories I'd told them. Dean Thomas sat me down the next day and told me that I needed to call the police. They said that there was clearly something wrong with him and that he didn't get it. They put a school version of a restraining order on him. He wasn't allowed to talk to me, and during tests, he had to be taken to a separate classroom. He would do everything he could to get around those rules. He would talk about me right in front of my face, but wasn't technically talking to me. He said, out loud to the class, "Some girl put a restraining order on me because she thinks I'm dangerous." The teacher laughed and said, "Doesn't she know you are joking? That's just you being Eric." The backlash I faced was enormous. All of his groupies shunned me and laughed at me. Even my own friends said I was overreacting. Except for Natalie. She was always intuitive. She said he made her feel uncomfortable and had started following her from class to class. Eventually, a mutual friend called me and told me that Eric had threatened to do something horrible if I wouldn't talk to him again. I went to the dean's office, and this time, every dean, vice principal, and even the principal got involved. My school was big, and there was around 550 kids in my class. The school year ended, and without the protection of the authorities there, I was fielding more phone calls, and when I blocked his number, he would call me on Callie's phone. He would drive around my neighborhood to see if my car was in the driveway. He even came to my tennis matches, the ones we initially bonded over. I could see his silhouette in the fence watching me. By senior year, things had calmed down. His attention was elsewhere, and I had picked my classes with the dean to ensure we weren't in any together. He was still watching. I would be walking down the hallway with someone he didn't know, and all of a sudden, he would be walking with us, next to my unassuming friend. "Hi, I'm Eric. Nice to meet you." He told my friends he had decided to wait for me because we were soulmates, and I'd come around eventually. I graduated high school and I moved out of town. I told my new college friends that if something ever happened to me, he was the one who did it. And really, that's all. There's no conclusion, really. Except he always knows when I come into town. I don't know how, because I haven't blocked on everything. I suspect he still checks my house. He's been arrested since, on drug charges and a few DUIs. I'm looking at his mugshots as I write this, to remember those dead eyes. Sometimes I think I maybe overreacted. Maybe it was all a joke. About a year ago, me and some friends went out to celebrate my birthday. After going to a movie, one of my friends asked if I wanted to go out to a club or bar. I said sure, but everyone else wanted to go home, as they had to work the next day and were tired, etc. My friend Katie, her cousin Megan, and I headed to the club. We were having a great time, dancing and drinking a little bit, whatever. Then Katie saw a cute guy who she wanted to hook up with. She started steering our group over to his group, which was conveniently made up of him and two other dudes. We all get to chatting. It's relatively innocent, and then the boys ask us if we want to go to a bonfire at their work. They said a bunch of people would be there and it would be fun. I was a little nervous, but Katie was really feeling this guy, so I decided why not. We left the club and followed the three guys about 20 minutes away, by car. We each had designated drivers. The distance was starting to really sketch me out, but I tried to stay relaxed. We pulled up to this huge chain wire fence with a gate, and the guys typed in a code on a box that opened the gate. We drove through and the gate closed behind us. I looked around, but saw no bonfire and no other people. Now I was really starting to get scared. We were in a solitary enclosed space with three strange men. But everyone was smiling and laughing as we got out of the car, and I figured I was probably being paranoid. The boys said their co-workers had bailed and that they were sorry. I asked where we were, and Katie's guy told us that we were at a haunted house. Not the paranormal kind, but the fake Halloween kind, which was currently out of season since it was May. He worked there in the fall, so he had the code. He asked us if we wanted to take a tour through the house and see the behind the scenes of how it all works. I thought that sounded really cool, and we all agreed. He led us into the actor's room, where the scares would hang out. Door in it led to this sort of maze of back pathways where actors could run through the house, unseen, and jump out in various locations at visitors. Now I should mention that by this point, the 3 guys had each selected a girl with who they were trying to score with. The guy who had chosen me, Brian, was average looking, about 6 foot and dark hair. He seemed a little odd, like he didn't really know the other 2 that well, but they were all friends. As we began walking through the main pathway of the haunted house, Megan and the guy she's with disappear in the back pathways. Suddenly, all the lights go off, a fog appears, and the music and noises of the house start. I knew that 2 of them had gone and turned the house on, but that didn't make it any less scary. I was now in an off-season haunted house alone with 3 strange guys, one of who was using the darkness as an excuse to grab onto me, even though I kept pushing him off. I held onto the back of Katie's shirt, scared to death I would lose her in the maze of hallways and be stuck alone with Brian. I was desperate to get out of the haunted house, unsure where Megan or the guy she was with were, or if they were going to pop out and scare us, or if she was even okay. But it felt like no matter where we turned, we weren't moving anywhere. We kept passing through this same room with a fake sarcophagus in it. I thought to myself, how the hell can I get out of this thing? Katie and her dude were obviously having a lot more fun than I was, and they giggled and walked ahead of us around a corner. When I followed them around the turn, they were gone. Now I was truly alone with Brian. He wrapped his arm tightly around my waist and I pulled back, saying, "Hey, I'm really scared. I want to get out of this house. How do we get out?" He told me he didn't know. I responded, "Don't you work here?" "No," he said. "I just met those 2 guys at the club tonight." Alarms were sounding in my head and I was in full panic mode. I took my phone out of my pocket and texted Katie, "Where the fuck are you? I want to get out of here." Before I started pushing my way through the rest of the house. Finally, after what felt like hours of endless turns and hallways, and Brian grinding accidentally against me and asking me, "Why are you freaking out? Relax." I found the exit door. As I pushed through it into the open air of the outdoors, I felt a little better. Outside of the haunted house, I tried to reason with myself that these guys were probably harmless and I was being silly. I checked my phone, but Katie hadn't texted me back yet. I decided I was going to sit by the car and wait for them to return from wherever they were. Brian kept talking to me into walking with him somewhere else, but I refused. He checked his phone and said, "Oh, so-and-so texted me. He and Katie are out by the lake. You want to go there?" I desperately wanted to reunite with my friends, who had the car keys, and get the fuck out of there, so I agreed. We headed down a dark path towards the lake, and when we got there, I didn't see anyone. Called out for Katie, but heard no response. Brian said, "Oh, they must have left already, and gone back to the house or something. I'll text so-and-so to come back." I sat down on a picnic table to wait, and that's when Brian made his move. He sat beside me and leaned over and aggressively kissed me, placing my hand on his groin, which was rock hard already. I pulled back and politely said, "No thank you, I'm not in the mood." He tried again, and again I said no. "Come on, just for a bit," he urged, placing my hand once more in his crotch. I stood up and walked a few steps away, shaking my head. Brian's expression changed. His eyes darkened and his mouth set into a hard line. He stood up and started pacing back and forth in front of me. "You've been fucking leading me on all night, you tease. Why did the other 2 guys get girls who are down to fuck while I'm here stuck with you? All of you are the same. I'm not good enough and I've never been good enough." Then he turned to look at me and said something that almost sent shivers down my spine. "You know, a lot of guys wouldn't be so nice to you, out here alone. A lot of guys wouldn't give you a choice." My phone beeped as he finished speaking, and I looked down to get a text from Katie saying, "We're in the back office watching a movie. We've been here the whole time. Come join." Katie had never been at that lake. Brian had made that text up to get me out there alone. At this point, I was more frightened than I had ever been, but I didn't want to give that away. I didn't want to give Brian the satisfaction of knowing he had scared me, so I turned and walked back to the haunted house with Brian about 10 feet behind. When I got back to the office, I told Katie and Megan, who were cuddled up on the floor with the 2 other guys, that I wanted to leave. And Katie promised we would in a few minutes. I asked for the car keys, at least so I could sit in the car and avoid Brian, who was standing in the office corner with his arms crossed. I went to the car and sat in the back seat with the doors locked for over an hour, texting Katie every few minutes, begging her to hurry up. It was now like 4:30 a.m. and I was scared, tired, and cold. At one point, Brian tried walking toward the car from the office, standing about 8 feet away and just staring at me. I kept the doors locked and avoided making any eye contact. Finally, at 5 a.m., Katie and Megan walk out to the car and we leave. I get home and pass out from exhaustion. When I wake up, I have a Snapchat friend request. When I check it, it's from Brian X21. Apparently Katie thought we hit it off and gave him my Snapchat name. Needless to say, I blocked his Snapchat and I no longer speak to Katie. I was lucky that nothing truly bad happened that night, but when I think of what could have been, when I think about Brian's voice and the veiled threat behind his words, my heart still skips a beat. So Brian, I sincerely hope I never meet you again. I've always had an innate fear of the night. Not so much the dark, but the night itself. As a child, my imagination was overcome with stories of creatures that would come alive at night, and only the safety offered by a house and light. I never had anything to base this fear on until a night when I decided to go with a buddy of mine to a baseball game, and I got stuck at a light at 2 a.m. after dropping him off at home. Of course, that night the game went into extra innings, and so I didn't get a chance to drop my friend off back home until well after 1 a.m. Everything was just fine on the way home until I hit a light right before the street that led to my house. It was a T-junction and I was turning left. The light is one of those that you think is broken until it turns green right when you finally decide to just run it. Of course I pulled up right as the light turned red. I would have just run the light, seeing as no one was there and it was closing in on 2 a.m. on a school night, but earlier that week I had heard the phrase, "Character is what you do when no one is looking." And for whatever reason, that was the night I decided to prove to myself that I was a man of character. Big mistake. I pulled to a stop at the light, feeling good about myself, bordering on self-righteous. When I happened to look out my window to my left and noticed a lady sitting all alone on a bus bench. We made brief eye contact and I quickly looked away. It was too late. I could see movement on my peripheral vision and I knew she was coming my way. I looked out the window and noticed she was carrying a bag. I quickly checked that my doors were locked and all my windows were up. I then moved my right foot above the accelerator just in case and braced myself for what was to come. I was hoping it would just be an awkward exchange and was praying for a quick light change before she reached me, so I could just get out of there. I knew there was a slim chance of that. She walked right up to my window, put down her bag and began to tap on my window. I nervously looked up at her and she motioned for me to put my window down. I had automatic windows, so I just imagined pushing too hard on the window button, that thing just coming all the way down. So I took a deep breath and lightly flicked it with my finger. The window moved microscopically down, but she didn't seem to notice or care. She then leaned in and began to talk. She said, "My boyfriend beat me up. I have a friend who lives down the street. Can you give me a ride?" I should stop and give a brief physical description of the bag lady. She was small and skinny and of indeterminate age. She was either in her mid-20s and had lived a hard 20 plus years on the street, or she was a 60-something-year-old who had basically lived a moderately hard life on the street. All that to say, just by looking at her, there was no way to verify her story. She looked beat up by life, not just by a boyfriend. But there was something about her delivery. It was robotic and seemed practiced, and like she was disconnected from the moment. That made my skin crawl. And after a brief, about a second, debate on whether I should do it, I told her that I had to get home and I couldn't give her a ride. After my first refusal, she leaned in closer and said the same thing again. "My boyfriend beat me up. I have a friend who lives down the street. Can you give me a ride?" This time I felt more confident when I declined to give her a ride, and I told her I had a curfew and I had to get home. She leaned in a third time and began her statement again. "My boyfriend beat me." At this point, the light changed. I slowly lifted my foot off the brake and started slowly rolling forward and began muttering an apology. She didn't move. She just looked at the light and then looked down at me, leaned in closer, and said 5 words that have haunted me ever since. "You made the right decision." Then she picked up her bag and walked back towards the bench. I peeled out of the intersection and cried and screamed all the way home. I have no idea what she planned to do, or if there were people waiting to jump in my car from the bushes had I moved to let her in. But that encounter has haunted me ever since and has confirmed in my mind that nothing good happens after dark.